Hello, friends, and welcome to Startup Yale 2021. My name is Claire Lineweber, and I'm the Executive Director of the Tsai Center for Innovative Thinking at Yale, or Tsai CITY. Working together with Tsai CITY's stellar team, as well as our colleagues at a network of centers and programs around Yale, such as Innovate Health Yale, the Center for Business and the Environment, Dwight Hall, and the Yale School of Management's programs on entrepreneurship and social enterprise, we are excited to bring to you the second virtual Startup Yale. It's been a challenging 14 months for all of us. Through it all, Yale student entrepreneurs have continued to work with passion and discipline on their new ventures. One benefit of our virtual presentations is that so many more people can join us today, tomorrow, and Saturday to learn more about the 24 teams and the problems they plan to solve with their innovative ideas. Thank you so much for joining us today. Before we begin, I have a few announcements. First, I will read Yale's land acknowledgement. Although we have a global audience today, many of us are based in the state of Connecticut. Yale University acknowledges that Indigenous peoples and nations, including Mohegan, Mashantucket Pequot, Eastern Pequot, Schaghticoke, Golden Hill Pawcusset, Niantic, and the Quinnipiac and other Algonquin-speaking peoples have stewarded through generations the lands and waterways of what is now the state of Connecticut. We honor and respect the enduring relationship that exists between these people and nations and this land. Secondly, I would like to thank our sponsors, Murtha Kalina Attorneys at Law and the Rothberg Catalyzer. Thank you so much for providing invaluable support to Yale student entrepreneurs. I also want to thank all those in the Yale Entrepreneurship Collaborative of university centers and programs who support student innovators every day, both within and outside of the classroom. Finally, it's my great pleasure to welcome to the stage our moderators for today's keynote with Yale College alumnus Porter Braswell. Jamal Davis Neal Jr., a joint degree graduate student at the Yale Divinity School and the University of Connecticut School of Social Work, class of 2024, and Angelica Gonzalez, Associate Professor of Biomedical Engineering in the School of Engineering and Applied Science and Faculty Director of Tsai CITY. I'll now turn it over to Jamal.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor to be here and to speak with Porter this afternoon. So, as you were told, our keynote speaker for today is Porter Braswell, the CEO and co-founder of Jopwell, an HR tech platform that helps diverse students and professionals unlock opportunities for career advancement. In 2011, Porter graduated from Yale University, and in early 2019, he released the book, Let Them See You, the Guide for Leveraging Your Diversity at Work, in which he describes his practice of bringing his full self at work, which informs our conversation today. Following our conversation today, we'll have time for Porter to answer some questions from the audience. We ask that you include your name and any Yale affiliation when sending your questions in. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Angelica to ask our first questions.
Thank you, Jamal. Thank you, Claire, for that beautiful introduction. Porter, so glad to meet you. It's a pleasure to have you here, and I'm sure all of the attendees are as excited as I am. Really, passion is what's required for entrepreneurial success, and there's no better way to continue having enthusiasm and passion for your project than throwing all of yourself into it. So let's go ahead and start with the first question, which would be, what really sparked you to think about authenticity as a founder and a leader?
Yeah, well, first, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Yale holds a special place in my heart. I learned a lot throughout my Yale experiences, and so it's great to be a part of this. And to get into the question of, I guess, the why behind authenticity and why I chose to follow a career where I can practice that. It starts with when I graduated from Yale, I started working in finance. And really, I started working in finance my junior and senior summers in high school, when I got exposure to early access diversity focused programs. And then at Yale, I spent 3 summers also interning in finance. And so after graduating and starting my career there, I was buying and selling currencies. Specifically, I was working at Goldman Sachs, and that's where I spent all of my summers. And while I was good at my job, I never felt that it was my calling. And I think when you are trying to find what fulfills you, I find fulfillment in feeling like I can thrive. I can bring my natural full self to a problem. I can leverage my experiences and my context and the information that I have to try to make impact, to make a positive impact. And once I recognized that that is what brings me fulfillment, I decided that I needed to leave the finance world and build a business that would allow me to feel those types of sentiments each and every single day. And when I looked back on my life and what I was uniquely capable and exposed to, it always came back to diversity recruiting. There was a huge problem at the time in 2014. All of the tech companies came out with their lack of diversity sets, and everybody said there's a lack of diversity because the talent doesn't exist. I knew that wasn't the case. I was passionate, and I thought I could be an expert in that particular arena. And that's why I went out and built Jopwell. And as a result of that, kind of flash forwarding to today, the world has worked in incredible ways for me. And I think it's because I have followed a path that enables me to bring everything that I can bring to the table each and every day. And amazing things happen when you have that ability.
Well, that's a really remarkable statement. And so when you, as you mentioned, part of the reason your book and your organization has gained so much traction is because it was a novel concept, especially in corporate America, thinking about bringing one's whole self and really around diversity and inclusion. So can you speak a little bit about that? Was it scary to be kind of one of the first innovators in that area?
Well, what was surprising to me, shocking to me, really, is that up until Jopwell, the work in this space was primarily focused on nonprofits. And I think that nonprofits do a fabulous job, and they have done a fabulous job for decades with coaching, training, mentoring, and partnering really closely with organizations and communities to do really hand-to-hand connectivity. I didn't understand why there wasn't a for-profit business being applied to that space, because if you're solving a pain point, which is the lack of diversity, you should be compensated for solving a business pain point, and why there wasn't technology applied to the space to do it at scale. And so those ingredients, I think, enabled Jopwell to be the first mover in this space and to do it at a large scale and raise institutional money and and to go out and to do it at the scale that we're now doing it. And the reason why I decided to write the book with the notion of, again, thinking about doing things at scale, I would frequently have conversations with community members about the obstacles that they were going to experience being a professional of color. And while, again, I love to having the one-to-one dialogues, it was the same conversation that I felt a book would be a great vehicle to have that dialogue at scale. And not just for professionals of color, I would argue more importantly, for the majority community to listen in on that intimate conversation so that they can recognize the obstacles and challenges that professionals of color face so that they can remove those barriers, because it's on them to remove the barriers. And so that's why I chose to write the book, to have that dialogue at scale.
So one, metric of success in your ideas is to have some follow-on people who are mimicking your success, following your innovations. Have you seen that happen? Are you still seen as one of the only promoters of for-profit entities promoting diversity and inclusion, teaching people how to be allies in the corporate space and how to support diversity and inclusion? Or do you see more follow-on happening?
So there's been a lot of interesting things as of recent that have started to occur. I think right now we live in a society where it's undeniable. If you are a corporation, you better master these topics of diversity, equity, inclusion, build cultures where people feel like they can bring their full selves and feel like they belong. We've been doing that work for years now. And it seems like the market has finally caught up to what we've been saying. But that dialogue, that conversation is nothing new for communities of color. Again, we grew up having those dialogues within our household. I think what's different this time and what we're starting to see is that the majority community, again, is starting to pay attention, and they're trying to do things differently. And there's this level of dialogue and acceptance of the conversations that have always been occurring, but now there's this level of acceptance So now you have a lot of companies that are being built in this diversity space trying to solve the many obstacles that have always existed. And they're trying to knock down those barriers. And so I think we have led the way and created a model where, again, we're backed by Y Combinator and Andreessen Horowitz. We're backed by a lot of incredible investors, Magic Johnson. And so that we've proven that you can raise institutional capital and you can do this at scale. And so now we have a lot of companies in the diversity space filling out different solutions for different problems. And it's incredible to see this industry being built.
So, just to give a little more thought to this idea of bringing your whole self in, what are the negative consequences either to an individual or to the corporation, to the places that you're working for in not doing so?
So the way I think about it, it's common sense in my opinion. So, working remotely, working from home, literally there's a television behind me. So it's really hard to have this dialogue. Let's say we're at work, to then literally turn around, turn on the news and hear the stories that we're hearing. If I then can't turn back around this way and unpack how I'm feeling about the things I just saw, I'm going to be distracted in this conversation. So it's on the job of an employer or of that institution to create the space to allow those dialogues to happen. Because if you try to act like I'm not going to turn on this television and get distracted, then you're not living in reality. And so if you want the most out of your employees, then it's on you to create these structures where people can feel like they can unload a bit and share their perspectives so that they can then perform at their highest level. And that's not to say it needs to be mandated that everybody joins those spaces, but you have to have the spaces for those who want to participate. They have to feel like there's a place for them to do so. And then equally importantly, the organization has to listen to what's being said in those spaces and then create structures so that people feel like they can perform at their highest level. And so it's a unique opportunity for companies, and those companies that get that right, they're producing incredible products. They're connecting with their consumers in ways they've never connected with their consumers before. They're stretching their marketing and their ability to connect on a whole different level. And that creates brand loyalty and it leads to more sales. It's good for business. And so I think we live in this really interesting time where those organizations that get that, they're crushing it right now.
So one of the things in your book that you really highlight is that diversity does not mean just recruiting people of different ethnicities or genders or sexual orientation for the sake of numbers, but really diversity of perspective, because that's really what leads to improved outcome, improved productivity. And can you talk a little bit more about that diversity of perspective and the outcomes, the beneficial outcomes for businesses?
Yeah, so I think what I've learned in my experiences is that, and it's changing now because of the society that we live in. But in the early days of building this business, people would say, Porter, you went to Yale. So because you went to Yale, you probably have the same perspective as anybody else that came out of Yale. And it was almost like it chips at you. It takes away. Because what they're failing to realize is that, yes, I went to a fabulous institution. I'm still a Black man in this country. And as a result of being a Black man in this country, I'm going to have a different perspective, because when I step outside, nobody knows I went to Yale. I'm not going to get the benefit of the doubt on anything. If a police officer pulls me over, they're not going to say, what college did you go to? So perspectives is so important, because purely by being a Black man in this country, I am going to perceive the world differently, and the world's going to react differently to me than, let's say, a white male who also graduated from Yale. So the power of perspective is so important, because now when I'm in the room and we're problem solving and we're trying to come up with solutions, if I feel like I could bring my full self and my perspectives, then that conversation is going to be really interesting and the solution is going to be really compelling, and that's going to be a great product. So that's the power of diversity, but you have to feel like you can share those experiences and those perspectives.
Yeah, and as you said, opening up new markets that would otherwise have been neglected, because now you have a new perspective and potentially a new product or new positioning for that product. So the other side of that you kind of alluded to was that it's the onus of the company, the management, to make spaces that are comfortable, that are inclusive, where people can feel like they belong. And, you know, what it reminded me of, and what some of, you know, what I related some of this to, was the idea that, you know, men are out on the golf course playing golf, and that's where some of the vital business transactions and the conversations are happening. Or, you know, in the restroom, you know, when they're one-on-one quick conversations. And so those spaces of comfort have been there for the majority. So widening those opportunities, are you finding that you have to argue and fight for those opportunities for the broader spectrum of people when they were such a narrow space before?
It's an easier fight now.
Hmm.
It was more difficult in the past. There's, again, going back to what feels different this time is that there's this level of acceptance.
Hmm.
We're getting less pushback that these spaces are needed and necessary. And so I'm very optimistic about the future, cautiously optimistic about the future, but nonetheless optimistic about the future, because there's, again, this willingness to at least to try to do things differently. And we're starting to see the effects of those organizations that, again, are fully embracing this, and they're willing to progress their culture. At the end of the day, for these for-profit large Fortune 500 companies, they're seeing better results. And so, you know, sometimes at the board level, shareholder value and creation of shareholder value is so important. And now it's being so closely tied to having a diverse workforce where people are thinking about retention and building the right culture and connecting with consumers in different ways, that it's all one now. It's not isolated to the diversity team. It's the whole company's mandate to make sure that all these dialogues are starting to occur. And that creates an amazing space for creativity.
I love that idea that it's not the diversity team's responsibility to do this. It's part of the culture of the business. It's part of the culture of the corporation. I guess the other thing I was wondering was, now that this has been, you've been doing this for some time now, right? You're you know, you've been very impactful. Are you hearing stories from either people who have followed the guidance that you've given in your book, companies who have really taken to heart the perspective that you've shared, or even members of the community? I know there, you know, members of my community often, when I was growing up, would say, you know, good luck out there, because, you know, it's gonna be hard to get a job looking like you, right? Hard to get, you know, hard to achieve. Are you providing hope? You provided me with hope, but are you providing hope to our communities? Are you getting messages back that say, you know what, it worked, and I'm here?
So this is the most gratifying and humbling part of this entire journey that I've been a part of. When I first started this business with my co-founder Ryan, we literally sat down. I remember like it was yesterday, on day one, and said, if we can build a small business, because we didn't think about funding, we didn't know how to build a startup. We were first-time entrepreneurs, but we thought we could build a small business. We thought that we could be like a team of like 4 or 5 people and have a couple hundred users on this platform that we were envisioning, and work with like 5 or 10 companies, and we can impact the lives of, you know, those few hundred folks. And if we can do that, and we can consistently do that, then like that's a small business that makes money, that's making impact, and like that would be incredible. And that was truly the mindset that we started with, which is why I think we became successful, because I think you have to start at that level, at that micro level. And it seemed like let's call it like every 2 weeks or so, we would get feedback from a member that said they just got a job, and it was the most empowering thing. Over time, you start to get lost, and we would do this whole celebration. You start to get lost in the magnitude of the impact when a company emails you and said, we just hired 100 people from your platform, or you get you know, these folks that are coming back and talking about how they got a job, they refer their friend got a job, and now it's like year over year over year, like their frat or sorority is leveraging Jopwell, and everybody's getting a job through that. And oftentimes it gets lost on us when you have tens of thousands of those stories, that it's still like that individual. And when we were first doing this, I would get on the phone and I'd be like, what was your experience like, and how did that go? And it was so gratifying. And it's incredibly gratifying now to hear those types of messages. But what I've recently done, because I really wanted to get back to that individual story and being able to connect, I started doing a podcast with Harvard Business Review called Race at Work. And it's a show that comes out, it's a weekly show, and we explore the topics of race, and I ask the questions that people are uncomfortable asking. And the feedback from that show is very much like, I wanted to ask that question, but I didn't know how to, and now I have a different perspective. And so I'm back to getting like these individual notes that are coming out to me about how impactful it's been. And I got the same response with the book. So I'm always trying to find things that get me back to like the individual story. And that's not lost on me doing it at scale on a platform. But it is the reason why I think all of us choose to live a fulfilling life, so you can make impact. And I don't know, you hit a topic for me. So
it's awesome. This is awesome. No, honestly, you know, like I said, you have put all of yourself into your work, and whether it's 10,000 lives or one life, you have made a huge impact. And I guess, as you mentioned, asking the hard questions, right, or the personal questions in this space, and thinking about professional, you know, so long, as you said earlier, in Black communities, minority communities, we've taught each other how to act in these spaces, right? So you, in your book, you really do outline, you know, that association and not assimilation, right? You don't have to give up of yourself. You can give of yourself to make the world better, to make your business better, to be better at your job. And so how that message in itself, has that resonated? I know that's kind of a theme in HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities. I know that that has to be a theme that resonates with the Black community, that you don't have to become somebody else to do good work.
I think that every workplace is different. And I think the workplaces that are thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion in a more progressive way allows for underrepresented communities to feel more comfortable to bring their full self and to not fully try to still be their unique self. And I think the positive thing is that it's common now that companies are talking about these topics. And for an individual of color, so much of my unique ability and assets that I bring to the table are my experiences that I've lived through. And so the ability to let that come out is a superpower. And so what I have received as feedback and how I think about it, you know, I'm in a room full of, let's call it 12 white males raising capital. In that dialogue, the way I think about it is that I have all of the leverage. I'm sitting there trying to explain something to them that they've never probably understood to the depth in which I'm trying to explain it to them, and they're learning from me. And anytime you can get into a dialogue where somebody is learning from you, you are owning that, you're owning that. And that's a huge place of leverage to be. Oftentimes we find ourselves being the only, or we have this thing I write about, the spotlight effect. When you find yourself being the only, as I do in rooms all the time, how do you leverage that spotlight? Do you leverage it for opportunity, or do you shrink and do you lose your voice? And I think it's a unique opportunity to get large and to know how to navigate that spotlight when it's on you. And if you can do that, then it's an amazing opportunity.
Wow. That is, again, so meaningful. Clearly, Porter, you have used your superpower for good and not for evil. You've made such an impact on so many lives. It's been an honor for me to get the chance to speak with you. I'm going to turn it over to Jamal, who's going to ask you a few more questions, but I'll remind the audience and all the participants to please forward questions with your Yale Association so we can make sure Porter gets your perspective and questions as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Angelica. And thank you for asking those really thought-provoking questions. Because Porter, I'm sitting here and I'm thinking maybe I have to connect with Porter after this because I am so resonating with what you're saying. And I really appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation with us.
My pleasure.
Yeah. So as a current Yale student, I'm a little bit more interested in your perspective as a previous graduate of Yale. So we know you graduated from Yale in 2011. You mentioned earlier that you struggled with the identity of being a Black graduate from Yale and how people made assumptions of your viewpoints based on your academic background without taking into account your social identities. So I'm just thinking, like, can you speak more to how your experiences at Yale shaped you as an entrepreneur? And did you know that you wanted to be a founder while you were here at Yale?
So definitely did not know I wanted to be a founder or an entrepreneur while at Yale. But I think one of the things that hit me at Yale for the first time is that I had a lot of friends and classmates whose parents had found success in a range of wide range of industries and fields and very different pathways to finding success. So what that taught me was, first, how do you define success? And in reflection, especially post graduating from Yale, to me, it wasn't about money. Success, in my mind, to this day, and I hope forever, never comes back to your bank account. That's not success. I think what I learned from the parents of my friends and classmates were that they were fulfilled in whatever they were doing and they were thriving at the highest level, making incredible impact. Sometimes that equated to wealth, sometimes it didn't. But the joy and the success they felt with their child going to Yale was something that I knew I wanted to chase. I also was exposed to individuals who had parents who started and owned things, owned assets. That was a new concept for me. And so while working in finance, I knew I wanted to own an asset so that I can have more control around the asset performance. And again, like now looking back, it made sense that that would be being an entrepreneur, but I couldn't word associate with it because I didn't have parents who were there's nobody in my family who built businesses before. So I didn't know anybody who looked like me who was building startups. So I think when I look back though on my time at Yale, all of those things, they all kind of make sense now to me.
Thank you for speaking about that. So I'm thinking, like, we have the awesome ability to access Tsai CITY now, which started a couple of years ago, right? So I'm just wondering, like, in 2011 or like while you were still a student at Yale, are there any resources that you access that could be possibly helpful for students that are present here?
In terms of being an entrepreneur?
Yeah.
Well, so again, I think everybody has their path to being an entrepreneur. And so for me, I think these ingredients enabled me to, thus far walk out a path of success being an entrepreneur. One, I played basketball at Yale. That was incredibly important to me. It still is important to me. But having the ability to show up, to practice, and put in hard work, and be a good teammate, and have good communication skills, and balance that with school, with the social life, and prioritizing things, that helped be an entrepreneur, which again, I didn't recognize it at the time. So being an athlete or doing extracurricular activities was an incredibly important thing that I did that led to this journey being easier. Another thing that I did is that I interned every single summer. So showing up to work as a college student in the summer and devoting my summer to picking up skill sets in the corporate world also helped me now understand what is it like to work within corporate America. And then starting my career at a large organization allowed me to understand the buying dynamic of a person that works at a corporation. So I didn't have the opportunity to have this type of center when I was at Yale, but my experiences just being a student and going through the rigor that comes with going to Yale has laid I think a tremendous grounding for how to go eventually and become an entrepreneur. So I don't think there is a prescriptive way to do it. The best way to do it is to throw yourself at all that Yale has to offer. And wherever you land in your pursuit of different activities at Yale, you're going to pick up skill sets that you won't recognize it necessarily at the time. But when you do build your own business, they're going to be invaluable assets and tools that you picked up.
I appreciate you talking about that because that's something that's like really personal for me, is really like learning to grow from everything and learning that every experience, whether that's negative or positive, is a learning experience, right?
Every experience.
Yeah, I really appreciate you talking about that.
My wife and I, just on the back of that, my wife and I, we have our first child, and her name's Mia. She just turned 1 years old. I think I am such a better leader within Jopwell now because I've learned patience. I've learned how to prioritize family life before work life. I've communicated that to the company. I think others have felt more comfortable communicating their, prioritizing personal life over work. Every experience, personal or work, can lead to, people progressing as people.
Yeah, thank you. Speaking about like personal experiences and exploring like personal identity within work, were there any experiences that you had within Yale, outside of Yale, within your college career that allowed you to explore your personal identities? Um,
Well, so much of my experience, and one of the things I had to, um, it was a challenge. I always identified, yes, as being a Black male, but I also was an athlete. I still am an athlete. Once an athlete, always an athlete. But I was a basketball player, and that was my whole life. I played that sport every single day, literally my entire life. And so graduating from school and losing that part of myself and not having to go to practice or having a game to look forward to, that was a huge part of my identity that I had to drop, and I had to develop other parts of my identity. But I remember feeling lost, feeling anxious about that. When you are an athlete on a college campus, people can they see you, especially in a sport like basketball. You're so visible. So so it's easier to introduce yourself to people for the first time because you have that connectivity of, oh, you play basketball. I love going to basketball games. In the real world, it doesn't work like that. And so you have to reshape your identity. And that was something that I think a lot of athletes struggle with. I know I struggled with it, and it's something that doesn't get talked about enough. But for me, that was something I had to evolve post college.
Thank you for speaking on that. I can relate to that. I've always been a pretty big personality, and so I'm just thinking about leaving like marching band in high school
Yeah.
and college and having to find something else. And then I did social programming in college, and like now I'm here, and thinking about ways in which I can carve my little niche.
Yeah, reinventing yourself. People get to know you for something. You
Mhm,
step into a different environment. Now you have to reinvent yourself, and it can be daunting.
mhm, mhm. Especially at such a formative age too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just looking through our questions real quick. As you feel comfortable, can you speak to any environments that didn't allow you to bring your full self to work? And how did that influence you while there and then after you left?
So maybe it's just because I have this outlook that there's always an opportunity, that I have always felt that despite the obstacles in front of me, I was going to overcome them. And I've always took that as like a challenge that I get excited about. But as I think back on my life, I think that when I felt like I couldn't really be myself, I go back to the time where I tried to look like everybody else. I grew up in a predominantly white town, a suburban town in New Jersey, and I found myself consistently trying to dress like everybody else, despite agreeing or disagreeing with like the look. But I bring that up to say though, because operating in different worlds, I would live and work, live and grow up and go to school in this predominantly white town. And then I would turn around and go play basketball in towns filled with people who look like me. And I always felt like in one instance, I didn't fit in because of the way I looked. And in the other instance, I didn't fit in because I didn't live in that neighborhood. And it was always that feeling of trying to operate in different worlds and not knowing who I am and how I need to show up consistently. I always changed how I spoke, how I dressed, so I could try to fit in. And so I felt like it wasn't until being at Yale where all of this comes together, you can be your whole authentic self. You don't have the time to think about all the other stuff. So I think my whole life was around being and operating in different worlds, but it all collided at Yale. And I think that's really where I found myself. That's who I found who I was, what's important to me, whether it was style or the way I spoke or people I hung out with. And I never had to apologize about that because they were all my classmates, all different walks of life. And it was the first time I saw it come together like that. And that was incredibly empowering for me.
I continue to resonate with what you're saying. I grew up in Southeast Connecticut, and then I went to the University of Vermont. And so those are like both like predominantly white spaces, where like now we call it in Yale perspicacity, where I had to learn code switching, right?
Yeah.
And operate as different people in these spaces. And at the University of Vermont, the community that I found were queer people of color. And so that's where I was able to find like my true self, my authentic self, and actually like start to form the identity that I want to be and that I want to continue being. So I'm really resonating with what you just said.
Well, I think people don't talk about it enough. Like finding and being your authentic self, it's not easy. I
Mm-mm.
think sometimes people think that like, oh, I just like you have to learn who you are.
Mm.
That's a process. It takes a lot of confidence, and you have to surround yourself with folks who allow you to be that. And so it's not a natural thing to do. But when you realize and you find that inner person, you never hide it. You can't. And that's like a very empowering place to be.
Yeah, yeah. You're speaking such truth. Thank you. Before we switch to audience Q&A, I have one last question for you. What advice do you have for the future founders and leaders that are here in the audience today?
I think a few things. One, I would say if you're building something for the right reasons, it's going to work out. And when I say the right reason is that you're trying to solve a problem. If you solve an actual problem that impacts and affects the lives of people, and you have a unique perspective on how to solve that problem, it's going to work out for you. And those that just want to be an entrepreneur and start something, good luck. It's a really hard process, and you're probably going to fail. You're probably going to fail regardless. But if you try to solve a real problem, it's worth the failure. And for me, how I've explored failure and what that means, it's given me more, again, empowerment. That's a word I keep hitting on. But it gives me more empowerment because failure to me is simply not pursuing something that's worth being pursued. And if I don't do that, then that is me being a failure. But if I'm pursuing that thing and it doesn't work out financially or it doesn't turn into a scale thing, that's not failure. That is a wrong definition of failure. So I think, as you're going through and trying to build an incredible, impactful business, if you're doing it for the right reasons, it's gonna work out. So just do it for the right reasons because the world needs good products and solutions. There are a lot of problems that we're facing, and it's worth focusing on those issues.
Thank you. Yeah, redefining failure as a motivation to grow. Oh, definitely. All right, we're gonna move to audience questions. So our first question from the audience is from Glenn. They ask, how do individuals with disabilities fit into the equation of diversity, and how or if does your organization try to address this?
So for the first portion of it, how it fits in is that it's a superpower. You experience the world differently. How you experience the world needs to be shared so that there are better products that are being produced. It is why diversity matters. In terms of how Jopwell, my company, specifically addresses it, is that we are solving a very specific pain point: the representation of Black, Latinx, and Native American students and professionals. Within that demographic, there are all types of diversity: veteran status, sexual orientation, folks with disabilities. And so we represent those professionals of color because there are unique barriers and obstacles that the 44 million college students and white collar professionals are experiencing. And so we believe it's our job to go out and knock down those barriers. There are other businesses that need to be built and that are being built that address other areas. But for any company to be successful, you have to focus, you got to zero in. And that's the task we chose to focus on. But again, it's a superpower, and you need to be able to leverage your experiences to share a different perspective.
Thank you. Our next question is, has the pandemic changed hiring practices? If so, for better or for worse?
From my seat, for the better. And to me, the reason why I think it's for the better is because there's now more willingness for companies to have remote positions. And so what that means in the things that I focus on is that, let's say you're a company based in Midwest America. You now have no excuse as to why you can't hire from a diverse talent pool. So if your local communities aren't diverse, that doesn't matter. You can't use that as an excuse anymore if you have remote opportunities. And so it's increased the ability for companies to have a more diversified applicant funnel, which ultimately is the mission that we're trying to solve for. So from my seat, it's been a good thing, because remote work can be effective and efficient for a company in terms of how they are scaling and growing.
Yeah, I think that question came from Abby when we were forming questions, and that was some of the thought that she had was, yeah, there's no excuse anymore, right?
Yeah.
For those hiring practices. Our second question from the audience is from an anonymous person. How has the pandemic changed? Oh, wait, no, just kidding. That's what I just asked. Sorry. Our third question from Beverly in Yale College, graduate of class of 1983. Do you get the impression that you are having any impact on recalcitrant organizations, or mainly building network effects among progressive organizations?
That's a good question. So can you state the question again? Are we having an effect on progressive organizations?
Do you get the impression that you're having any impact on recalcitrant organizations, or mainly building these network effects among progressive organizations?
That's a good question. I think that we are having impact across the board, because again, it goes back to this level of acceptance. The level of acceptance differs depending on the leaders of certain organizations and what's important to them and how they're thinking about the world and how they're experiencing the world. But I don't really care what side of this progressive spectrum you fall on, or your desire to move the needle forward, and how I would define it moving forward. There is still this level of acceptance that when you turn on the television, you can't deny what's happening. So at the very least, everybody's open to conversation. How likely they are to act on that differs. But I do think that we're making impact across the spectrum, because people are at least engaging in the conversation for the first time in a way that they weren't necessarily willing to do before the times that we find ourselves in.
Yeah, I appreciate you acknowledging that the real world is out there, right? Like, we can't just exist within our bubbles and within our organizations. We need to address what is going on in the public. Yeah. We also had another anonymous question for somebody who's interested in having you speak a little bit more about finding your authentic self. What does that look like? What did that look like for you?
So I would say the best place to begin is asking yourself, how do you define success and how do you define failure? Because if you can honestly answer those questions for yourself, you're going to go through a lot of exploration. For me, the way in which I kind of started this journey of at least asking myself about success is, yes, I saw it at Yale, but more personally, after my first year at Goldman, my cousin passed away. He was 31 years old, and he was the first person in my life that was that close to me that had passed. And he had a tragic accident. He fell off a mountain. And I remember during the time of his funeral and going through the process of, laying him to rest, asking myself, would I rest in peace if I were to die? And that haunted me, because the answer was no. And I think, we say those words, rest in peace, and but we don't think about that. And that brought me on this journey of exploration. Like, what would it entail for me to actually rest in peace? Like that concept, which then led me to start to think about, well, what does success mean? And who am I supposed to be? And what am I supposed to do in this world? So that when my time does come up, as it will for everybody, I will rest in peace. And so again, like Yale was the starting place for me to like find myself and to feel comfortable about my identity and not having to change and code switch all the time. But it was that moment for me, that was a personal moment that forced me into trying to figure out what is my life's work. And then I started thinking about failure, and I started thinking about success, and I started questioning, well, why wouldn't I quit my job? And I thought I wouldn't quit because here I was, I went to Yale, I worked at Goldman Sachs, and like that was success. And from the outsider's perspective, all was good, and my parents can brag about me and all those things. But is that success? And so it forced me into this whole process. And now that I'm a father, I'm thankful that I went through that process. Um, but for me, that's how I started to find my voice and find who I am and my calling, and not be intimidated and not be scared of failure. And that in faith, that has allowed me to find who I am. And I'm fortunate I found that at 33, not when I'm 73. So
Thank you for sharing that experience with us. I'm sure your vulnerability is really important for people to see here in our audience. I know I really have similar experiences with death in that way, and having that reshape my reality and reform my thinking. So thank you so
yeah,
much.
absolutely.
I just want to encourage the audience one more time to submit some more questions through the Q&A function. We have a few more questions that we can ask on our end, but we also want to make sure that we address your perspectives as well. So one of these questions that I was coming up with when thinking about this conversation, I've been in positions of leadership before where I've had to hire people. So what does bringing your authentic self to work look like when in a position of leadership you have to offer constructive criticism, or what does that look like in hiring practices?
Yeah. So let's focus on the feedback. How do you give feedback? So for me, it's a sign of respect. I think that, and I just had a conversation with a coworker today. To me, the most important, two important skill sets that I hire for, that the entire business hires for. Two things: you work hard and you're a kind person. If you have those two ingredients, you're going to be fine. And as a result of being a hard worker and being somebody that's kind, I hope my colleagues think that of me. I would hope everybody at Jopwell would say that Porter's kind and he's a hard worker. And as a result of that, when I give feedback, I am so direct, because to me, it's a sign of respect that like I'm doing it with the best intentions to make sure that you understand where you can be improving. It's to make you a better professional. But because there's trust that I have good intentions, and that like I also bust my butt to work hard, and I am at the end of the day a kind person, I think that getting that level of feedback can be digested, and it doesn't feel personal, and it's not unreasonable. And so I think for leaders within companies or hiring managers, if you portray and you are somebody that really comes to work every day, and they work really hard, they're good at their job, and ultimately they are a kind, caring, empathetic person, it's so much easier to then give feedback to people, and you build that level of trust. And so I think that I can give that level of feedback to folks that report into me, because they trust me that I'm doing it for the right reasons. I'm not just saying things to nitpick. I'm giving constructive feedback, and as I need it too, to become a better leader. We're all trying to do the same thing. We're trying to move the business forward, and so people have to be receptive to that.
I'm noticing a little bit of your choice of word there with the word kind. This is a personal question. What is there a difference for you between like being kind and being nice?
Yeah, I think so. I
Okay.
think I think to me, nice, and this is just this is how it hits me. It might hit everybody differently, but to me, when I think of nice, I think of like for the moment. I don't know. I think like, oh, that was nice of you. Like, I think like for the moment, like that was a nice thing you did. That was a nice gesture. I think of the word kind as like you live a kind life. You are a person that you can be approached, um, and you're consistent. I think kind is more consistent than in the moment as like nice. I think it's great to be nice. And again, maybe those words hit people differently. Maybe people would view it as the flip. But for me, kind is more of a consistent thing that's there at all times, and you're not surprised when I'm kind. I think I think if somebody's described me as being nice, there's like the assumption of sometimes I'm not nice. And so I don't know. So for me, I try to be around kind people.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel similarly about the difference between those. Um, Another question from the audience: how did you navigate the potential pushback or concern from family and friends when moving off the successful path of being at Goldman Sachs to finding your own personal success?
That was the most difficult part of the entire journey. And we can spend a whole hour talking about that. But for me, the relationship I have with my parents is that I feel like I owe them everything. I have the most respect for them. They're the people I look up to the most. And my whole life, I've done what they've told me to do. And this was the first time where I told them that despite you telling me, because when I was trying to explain to them that I wanted to leave and do something different for a year, they were like, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. Then I came to them with the idea that I wanted to do a year later, which was build a HR tech platform to help underrepresented communities find career opportunities. And they were like, so you're non-technical, you're a poli-sci major, you've never built anything remotely close to a platform. And I was like, yes. And they're like, you've never done hiring because you don't work in HR, you buy and sell currencies. I was like, yeah. And they're like, and you've never built a business your entire life. I was like, yeah. And they're like, so you're gonna go leave to go do those things? I was like, that's exactly what I'm gonna do. And they're like, that's a terrible decision. You are going to fail. That is a miserable idea. Like, who do you think you are that you can pull off three things that you've never done? And that's when that self reflection and internalizing is so important, because I was like, mom and dad, I hear you, but you're wrong, and I'm gonna go do this. And now they're like the biggest fans ever, which is like hilarious. But that's why it's so important to find like, what are you meant to do? And it's not somebody else's definition. So had I listened to my parents, I'd be an okay money manager in finance. And that's not what I think I was called to be.
You really did that.
Doing it
Doing
on
it
the journey,
on the
of doing
journey. Somebody in our audience just thanks you so much for sharing openly. I just wanted to take some time to.
it. I appreciate that.
Somebody else from the audience says, we know that in order to show up authentically, our workplace must provide us a safe space to do so. Are there ways for us as employees to advocate for our workplaces to create these safe spaces? Or are there ways for us to assess, like during an interview process, whether a workspace honors employee authenticity?
Yeah, so I'll start with the latter one first, and you should ask that throughout the interview process. As a candidate, you have to have the belief that this organization is privileged to have you, right? If you start from the mentality of like they need you, and this isn't you trying to get a job and you're trying to take anything that gets thrown your way. If you come into that interview process with the mentality of like they need to be recruiting you, then you would feel the confidence in that dialogue to ensure that the things you want to perform at your highest level, and if that's having a diverse, equitable, and inclusive culture, you're asking them those questions and you're interviewing them. And if they can answer those questions with some form of authenticity and perspective, then there's probably something about that culture that's working well. So feel free to ask those questions. And if they can't answer those questions, that's a red flag. That means it's not ingrained in the culture, especially if the people who are outwardly interviewing people, if they can't talk about it, you're safe to assume that most people internally can't discuss it as well. So feel free to ask the question. In terms of your current employer, again, it's undeniable that diversity leads to success. It leads to better business outcomes. So if you find that your organization is not embracing the different ingredients that lead to a more inclusive and equitable culture, you have a unique opportunity to go up to the senior most person in the organization, and with the right tone and the right way of communicating, explain how if the company prioritized building out this type of culture, it would lead to more financial success. And there has to be, when I say the right tone, and when I say like the right space on how to do that, it changes workplace to workplace. But if you approach that conversation to the senior most person, I think you can make a pretty compelling argument as to how this company can progress. And you will become known as a problem solver because you're coming up with a solution, not just a problem. And that's a unique opportunity for you.
Thank you. Our last question from the audience is from Ronaldo Varian, an incoming student within the School of Public Health. And they ask, what is your fervent hope for all those who are listening to you today?
My hope is that I don't care if you end up starting your own business or you work within corporate America, you have to think like an entrepreneur. And when you see something that needs to be fixed, you go out and fix it. If that means starting your own business, go do it. If that means solving it internally, go do it. If it means solving something in your community, go do it. But don't listen to others in terms of what's possible and what's not possible. Define for yourself what success and failure means, and find the energy, and I would say most importantly, the courage to go and solve problems. There are a lot of problems that clearly need to be solved, and you are involved in the Yale network. So you have resources and people you can call upon to help you solve it. And so it's worth being solved.
Thank you, Porter. It's been such a pleasure to hear about your personal experience and bringing your authentic self and the resources and experiences that you had within Yale. I'm really glad to have been able to be here with you today. I'm just going to turn it over to Angelica to wrap up our session here.
Awesome. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Jamal for sharing their perspective and their beautiful questions. The audience, I'd like to thank you for your attentiveness and also the questions that were insightful. I'd like to thank Abby Winslow for putting together such a great platform of events. But I'd also like to thank most of all you, Porter. This was a very revealing, educational, inspiring conversation. So I can't thank you enough for your time and for your willingness to do this.
Well, thank you for having me. Yale holds a very special place in my heart, so I appreciate welcoming me back to have this important conversation.
Come back anytime. And for the rest of today, tomorrow, I'd like to welcome everyone and encourage everyone to visit startup.yale.edu, check up the schedule of events, and join us for the 7 Startup Yale Prize events that are going to be happening throughout the next few days. So we really look forward to your participation. Thank you all.